Welcome, everybody, to our presentation today on understanding the admissions process. My name is Darren Worcester from EMA and admission.org. It is my pleasure to have you with us today. A couple quick real notes before we jump into this. One, we will be going through the questions that you submitted when you registered. That's not to say if you have a great question at mine or something pressing. This presentation is brought to you thanks to Brewster Academy. We appreciate their support in making this presentation available to you. And with that, it is my pleasure to introduce you to Alice Mann. She is the Senior Associate Director of Admissions at Brewster Academy. Alice, thank you for being with us today.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here and talk about the admissions process, and hopefully answer a bunch of questions that are out there where people are wondering about, hey, what do I do next? I have been at Brewster for 7 years, and I work in admissions. Brewster is also a boarding school, so I live in a dorm and I do some coaching, which is pretty typical of boarding school life in general. But let's dive into more of the admissions questions than the other parts of the school.
Excellent. Yes, we will take a few minutes later to learn a little bit more about Brewster, but to get things underway, let's dive into some of those questions that we received. And a lot of the questions, if we start at the beginning, Alice, were really around how does the process work? What do I need to know? So if you could give us a basic overview of the main components of the process, that to get us kicked off, that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. So the admissions process for independent schools consists of an interview, an application, and then there are a lot of events that schools will put on too. So there might be open houses, they might have virtual events. So really the admissions process is designed to be informative and really help students get to know schools and understand what each school has to offer. And also, like, there are certain things that as an applicant you're really looking for. And so you can do some research into schools and figure out what schools have what. So once you have done some of that research and you've figured out a few schools that you're interested in, then you can go into the next part of the process, which would be to inquire. So usually on the website, there is a button under the admissions section of the website that is an inquiry form. Fill out those forms. And once you fill out those forms, that's where admissions folks will get your contact information so they can keep you in the loop on all things that are happening at that school. So some of those events that I mentioned before, like open houses or virtual events, they'll send you emails, let you know when those are happening so you can be a part of those if you want to be. After that, after you inquire, then there is an application. So each school will have a different, and might not have a different application. Some schools use the same application, but each school will have their own application process. So you'll want to look at the admissions apply page on the websites to figure out what that school's application process is. A lot of times schools will allow families to come to campuses and get a campus tour. So that can be a great next step after the inquiry. Call the offices, sign up for a campus tour, and your interview typically happens at that same time as the campus tour. Some schools do all of their interviews via Zoom, so just find out what that school is looking for and wants. And so you'll go to the campuses, feel it out. If you can't get to the campuses, most schools will also have virtual tour options online, so you can see as much of the school online as you would like. And if there's something that you don't see that you want to know more about, reach out to the school to learn about that. So working at a school, we try to be flexible so we understand some students can come to campus. It's a really great way to understand a school, but also there's some limitations to that too for many different reasons, for where people live, ability to get away from work, whatever it may be to see a school. So we want to provide those virtual options too. So tour, inquire, tour, visit campuses, and then apply and figure out what the application for that school is. Those are three basic. Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much. So I think the big thing everybody should be keeping their eyes on and tracking is when are those application deadlines? You want to give us a little background on that?
Yeah, definitely. So the application deadline will depend on the school. So once you get your list of schools and what you're looking at, look at what those application deadlines are. And the reason why I say it depends on the school, Some schools have rolling admissions, which means as soon as you submit the application, they're going to give you a decision within a certain time frame. Um, there's some schools that have more of a traditional application timeline where it's one deadline, whether it's a lot tend to be January 15th and a lot tend to be February 1st. So you apply by that deadline and you find out your decision typically on March 10th. And then there are some schools that have early deadlines too, whether it's early action or early decision. So that's why I say you really got to look at each school and figure out what that deadline is. Depending on how many schools you're looking at too, all of this information may seem really clear when you're looking at it the first time, but then the deadlines are coming and it gets confusing. So my advice is to have a spreadsheet or a notebook or something to keep it organized for yourself so you know when each school's application deadline is. When I mentioned early decision and early action, talk to the schools that offer those about that, because some of those earlier application deadlines can be binding. So it means that if you are accepted to that school, you will agree to go to that school and enroll at that school. Early action tends to be non-binding, so you can apply early, find out your decision earlier, and then you can still wait to hear from other schools before deciding where you would like to go to school. So just pay attention to those details and what you would like to apply for and what deadline is when for each school. And the more you keep it organized, the easier it's going to be for you throughout the process.
That's great. And stop me if I'm off base at all here. With rolling admissions, I think there's, from my understanding, there's some other things for families to be aware of too. You mentioned, if they apply now, they may get a decision within a couple of weeks. There are a lot of schools that will have a January 15th or February 1st deadline and then go into rolling admissions in the spring, that sort of thing. Some schools will flat out have rolling admissions. I do think, if you were applying for financial aid to a rolling admissions school, that's something to be more aware of, where the early bird probably has a better chance of getting the worm there. If applying to an early admissions or a rolling admissions school, in the summer per se, that could have implications on the financial aid well potentially being dried up. Is that all sort of in your experience?
Yes, I definitely agree with that. Like if you are somebody who have decided later on in the process that you want to apply to schools, which there are people the summer before decide, okay, we actually really want this. Still reach out to those schools, find out if there are spaces. Just know that financial aid is often allocated at that point. And so the chances of getting financial aid for that year can be a lot harder. So just call the schools, ask them, and figure out where it is. But all of that, I agree with what you mentioned.
The next question made me smile because I think I understand the thinking behind it. Alice, you're about to enter interview season, where you will be interviewing folks a lot. And this parent asked, is it better to interview earlier in the process or later? So I think if we, read between the lines, they're basically asking, is it better to be one of the first people and make a great impression at the beginning of the pack, or is it better to be at the end and leave that lasting impression as you go into your review process?
I mean, I think it's a really great question. It's actually, it makes me think about it too, but I honestly think whatever works best for the family is when you should interview. So if that means, going to do your interviews tomorrow, then do it. If that is the best time for you to interview, sign up and do that. If you want to interview in January, just know that those interview slots can book up before then. So just make sure to book those appointments now if you want to interview later. I don't think one gives you advantage over another. This is what I will say though. The earlier that you interview and you start really talking to people at the school, the more time you have to really understand that school. And that is from your perspective. So as a student, if I put myself into the student's chair, right? And I am considering schools and I am looking at these schools, I'm going to understand the school better if I'm talking to somebody who is at that school, or that person, that admissions counselor could connect me with the program director or the coach or the teacher that I really want to talk to. So if you start those connections earlier in the process, you have more time to really dive in and figure out, okay, what is the culture of the school? Where do I see myself in this school? Are these people I can see myself working with? So I think if you interview earlier, you have more time for that. And again, I don't think it makes a difference in terms of the admissions lens and committee reviews, anything like that. So that's totally up to you. When it works for you is the time that you should book the appointments and go.
Those are some great tips. I really like the one on, if you're going to do it later, still make sure you get that time slot. I hear time and again of, people getting locked out and not being able to book times. So that is great. The next question, a couple of questions here around, how important is attending an open house and doing a campus tour? I know we have a lot of international families, registering for the event, and they're probably thinking about, when do we find time to travel if we're looking at schools in the United States or Canada. So what's your take on the value and importance of going to an open house or a campus tour?
Yeah. I mean, those programs, having worked at a few different schools and having run the special events at schools too, those programs are designed to be helpful for the families and for the applicants. So we are offering these programs, not expecting that families attend them or attend every single one, right? Like that is not something that for the schools I've worked at that like necessarily is important to the process. However, it is important if it is important to you. So if you want to go to the open house, and the benefit to attending an open house is you tend to hear from more students, you hear from administrators, faculty, and you get to dive deeper into the school than just a campus tour visit. If that's something you are looking for, then you should sign up for the open house. And that includes the virtual events too. If there is a virtual event that will answer some of your questions or things you're wondering about, then sign up for that virtual event. In my eyes, when I'm, reviewing an applicant and everything, to me, if they've attended an open house, I don't see that when I'm reading a file. So I don't know that information. I could look it up, but reading time is very busy. So we are focused in on really trying to figure out who this person is for the files that we're reading. And so in terms of the committee and admission side of things, for myself, I really see those programs as benefiting the applicants and their families and trying to understand the school. So if there's stuff you want to know and people you want to meet, go to those programs, sign up for those webinars. And if you're unable to, it is not a big deal. Like that is why, well, some of the virtual events too might be recorded, like this one, so you can watch it at another time. But that is why, as I was mentioning before, there are those virtual tours online, so you can see the campuses. Also, if you want that, authentic, real conversation, admissions counselors are there to connect you with people. So if there is an administrator you want to talk to, if it's the academic dean or, the director of Res Life or student activities, you should talk to those people and ask to be connected to those people, because even having a short 5-minute conversation with them might answer some of your questions. There are real limitations to people being able to travel to schools, to see the schools for various reasons. And so I hope families don't feel pressure like they have to show up to those events to show demonstrated interest, because mostly those events are designed to just be helpful for the family and applicant to better understand the school. And we also love feedback, I will say too. So if there is something you want to know that you feel like, the school is not offering, reach out to your admissions counselor. We take those notes, we take those that feedback. And if there's something it seems like a lot of families want to know more about, then we look at our own process and we say, hey, our open house really didn't address this. How do we adjust it for next time? Or if there's a virtual event that could address that, then we look at that too. So I would say communication in this whole process is key. So attend those events if you want to, and if you can't, not a problem.
That's great. I would add, and not to put pressure on attending the events, but we recently researched and interviewed over 3,000 families who have gone through the process. And, when we asked them what was most influential in their decision-making process on selecting a school, on-campus events was the top answer, as getting to. So you had mentioned earlier, like the more time you give yourself to get to know the school, the better. And previous families who have gone through this saying, getting to visit the school, getting to talk and meet people was really what sealed the deal for us. So, if it isn't a barrier, in getting to the school for you and it's something that you're able to do, based on what, other people are saying, I think it's a good idea to do it if you can.
And those events too extend beyond the initial part of the admissions process. It is into the second phase too of you get your acceptance letters. A lot of schools will have revisit days, and going back for those revisit days can be really helpful in making that final decision of where you want to go to school. And so take advantage of some of those events that happen post decisions too, both virtual but also in person.
That's a great point. All right, our next question is, what part in the process seems to take the longest or be the most troublesome to complete? I love this question. Essentially, Alice, from your side of the fence, are there typical stumbling blocks in the process or pieces of the puzzle that you want to warn families like, hey, don't underestimate this part of the process. It's probably going to take longer than you think, so you should really get started on it ASAP.
Yeah, definitely. I think the piece that can take the most amount of time, and I understand why, are really the student essays. So the space where the student is completing questions and short answers or longer essays to talk about a number of different things. It depends on the application or if there's a supplement for a school, what those questions are. But I think that piece can be the piece that takes the longest. So when thinking about the student essays, allow your child or you to have time to look at those essay questions, draft up answers, and then give yourself space and go back to it and say, do I really believe this is what I want to say in my student essays? Those student essays are time from the admissions perspective. It's a time where I really get to hear the student's voice. If I've interviewed somebody, I feel like, oh, I've gotten to know them. Hopefully, I stay in touch with them throughout the whole process. So by the time committee comes around and that student's file comes up and I'm talking about them, I know them well. But for somebody who I haven't met in the process, when I read those essays, that is me hearing their voice. And so those essays, I really encourage students and families to have it be the student's authentic voice. Yes, we want them to be polished and grammar correct with capital I's, things like that. But it should be proofed and reviewed, but we don't want it to be changed by anybody else. We want it to be that student's voice that we are hearing, have it be the answer that they really want on there. And often with an application, there's a few questions that a student is answering. And ideally, in those answers, it's a variety of answers that they're giving. So it's not just one topic they're talking about in many different ways in those essays, but it's different topics. It's highlighting different parts of their personality, different interests that they have, different experiences that they've had. And so those student essays, I think, should be one that's prioritized and looked at towards the beginning of the process, so you give enough time and space for that, because they are important. And it's not the end all be all because there are many other parts of the application too. But the rest of it, it's asking for recommendation. Those are in the hands of other people, and transcripts from schools. There's a parent statement, and also like biographical information. And again, can be supplements, or it might be a different application that requires different things. But if there is a parent statement, I would say parents are pretty good about knowing how to talk about their kid and what they want to say about their kid. I mean, if it's my kid, I'm going to be proud of my kid and have a lot of wonderful things to say in that. So I think the parent statement can go a little bit faster, but those student essays can take some time. So focus in on those.
Yeah, we have some questions coming up on the parent statement. An interesting question just came in about essays, and Jennifer asked, should students be using AI for the student essays on the app if cited, or is that inappropriate?
I would say no. I would say no. And the reason why is because I don't believe it's an accurate representation of the student, right? Like using AI, I mean, there is a certain way that AI writes too. So like if I read enough AI essays, I could see, oh, this sounds like it could be an AI essay, right? And it doesn't necessarily show the student's abilities in their writing skills either, right? Like when the student gets into our classes, we want those essays to be an accurate representation of what they're also going to contribute to those classes where they're writing essays. So I would avoid AI, even if there is that temptation to just quickly type in the list into AI and have them draft up an essay for you, but avoid it. Have it be your true, authentic voice, so we can really see your skills, but also hear you.
I would add to that, the part that, Alice, excuse me, is probably not going to disclose to you is like they read a lot of essays from students at specific age groups. So, they can spot pretty quickly when a student's writing doesn't match up with, what is age appropriate for them. So it's just not worth the risk because, using AI potentially says something else about the student, and it's not necessarily the way that the child should be portrayed or would want to be portrayed, trying to get into a school. So good stuff there. One other question on the, this could take longer than you think vein. You mentioned recommendations and those being in somebody else's hands. It's a fine needle on when you ask for the recommendation and not, I mean, obviously teachers are extremely busy as well. They got end of terms coming up, towards the application deadlines. But in the same vein, I don't think you want to ask too soon. What's the right time for families to kind of reach out and ask for recommendations?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I again defer to the deadlines. So look up your schools, figure out when those deadlines are. Some might be in November, December, January, or February. So pay attention to if it's a November deadline, you want to give those teachers at least a few weeks to write the recommendations. If it's a January or February deadline, same thing. And it's that balance of you want to ask them with enough time for them to thoughtfully complete it. And you want to ask them late enough in the school year where they've gotten to know you as a student and learner in person. And so if it's a January or February deadline, I would ask them early November to start thinking about it. And then you can send them the form in November or December. Give them enough time to really have flexibility on their side and their schedule to get those recommendations done. For some teachers, it's going to be, it will depend on their schedules too, whether it's a trimester school or semester school and when their grade reports are due. So the more heads up you give them, the more time they'll probably be able to have to fill out a thoughtful recommendation. So look at the deadlines, give them at least a few weeks. And at this point in the year, I mean, most students have been in school for almost 2 months. Your teachers probably know you. And so you can ask them at any point or give them a heads up that you're going to be asking them. You can also add in though, if it's a teacher that you feel like doesn't know you that well still, or it's a teacher that for whatever reason there's a strained relationship, you can also add additional recommendations to your application. So you could ask another teacher to submit a recommendation. You could ask a coach. You could ask a family friend who knows you really well. You could ask anybody to submit an additional recommendation. So if you feel like, hey, they're requiring me to submit 3 recommendations, 2 I feel really good about, but this one I don't feel so good about, then add in an additional recommendation and send that in from somebody who really knows you and knows what you're capable of, because we will read everything that is sent to us. I also don't recommend sending in 5 additional recommendations, right? Like there's a balance to it. So be thoughtful about those additional recommendations and if you think they're going to add a lot to your application. And if that answer is yes, then ask that person and have them submit it. In most cases, you don't need more than 2 additional recommendations. So figure out who those 2 priority people are if you really want to submit an additional one, and ask them.
Excellent. All good advice. Alice, we're almost halfway through here. I'm going to bundle 2 questions together. So I
Okay.
think probably fairly quick hit questions. We've gone through the process. You gave a great overview of what the major steps are. Is there anything different, whether you're a day student versus a boarding student, in the process, and or if you're an international student or a student from, outside of the United States or North America looking to travel abroad to study, is there anything different for those students applying to the school they need to be aware of?
Yeah. In terms of the application for day students and boarders, I mean, if it's an all-day school, then everybody's application is going to be the same. If it's a boarding school, excuse me, the schools that I've worked at, there's no difference in the application, whether it's day student or boarder. International students, we will ask for English proficiency testing. Some schools will have English learning language programs. Some schools will not, but that English proficiency testing helps schools determine if that student would need that additional English learning support. So, but when I think about day students versus boarders and what they are considering when looking at schools is, if you want to be a day student at a boarding school, think about the commute and day to day what that looks like, and if that's realistic for you. The nice thing about being a day student at a boarding school is it's so flexible. You can get to campus early in the morning and have breakfast with your friends, and you can stay through dinner and stay on campus, up to or just after study hall. It depends on the school and their regulations. So it's a lot of flexibility for drop off and pickup. But if you are traveling 45 minutes every day, that can add up really quickly. So then you might want to consider, okay, what is the distance we are willing to commute to go to that school, or should we consider that school for boarding? Obviously, if it's an all-day school, it's a different situation. But that is the piece, like in terms of application, it's going to be the same, but that is the piece that I would consider when thinking about whether or not you want to be a day student or a boarder at that school.
Thank
And
you.
international students, I guess, like when I think about that, in even domestic students who are traveling by plane, you might want to think about what that looks like, where you would fly in, how easy it is to commute to and from that campus too. Even though you're going to do it less often, you're probably just going to do it a few times a year. But you might want to know, what does it actually look like once I'm there to get to and from home? And how often can I realistically get home? Or stay in the US with some friends, because you'll make lots of friends if you're at a boarding school. And then you also, being an international student, you want to consider how many students are boarders there. And if it's a small population or a large population, if it's homestay or living in a dorm, all of those considerations too.
It's a good quote. One of the questions we had in that vein, do boarding schools typically provide shuttle services to and from airports for their boarding students?
Yeah, I would say most do. I mean, all the schools I've worked at, we have. Um, so most do, but definitely ask that question at the school because you don't want to make the assumption that they do. Some schools will also offer transportation, but charge a fee for that transportation. So any of that, I would just ask about, and ask each school what that looks like. Um, yeah, good question.
Excellent. All right, so we've hit and surpassed by a couple minutes our halfway point. We have a lot of great questions coming up. We've got financial aid, we've got interviewing, we've got the parent statement that everybody always wants to know about, of course, coming up. So we've got a lot of important questions yet to come, but I would love it if you would take a few minutes here and tell us a little bit more about Brewster.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, I have a presentation, so I'll just share my screen. So of course, I work at Brewster. I've already said I've been here for 7 years. I love this school and I don't see myself leaving this school, and it's because of the community. The community here is wonderful. You can see in this photo our school at our first all-school meeting of the year. But the people who choose to be at Brewster, kind, considerate, nice people. And I really like nice people. So here I've been for 7 years and will continue to stay. So Brewster, we're located in Wolfboro, New Hampshire. You can see right here a photo of our campus. We are in New Hampshire. So yes, we get snow, as you can see. It really benefits our skiers and snowboarders and people who like to go sledding. But in the center of the campus, in this photo, you can see the academic center, our student center, dining hall. So that's the heart of campus. On the left and right, you can't see all of it in this photo, but our dorms and more. We have 80 acres here on the in Wolfboro, and we have a half-mile of shorefront property on the shore of Lake Winnipesaukee, which is the largest lake in New Hampshire. The town itself, if you're looking at this photo, is off to the right. It's where a lot of those lights are shining. So that's downtown Wolfboro, which is a small little touristy town, but it's wonderful. You can go out to eat, get ice cream. There's grocery stores, pharmacy, and touristy shops all within walking distance. Our school is about 350 students, 85% are boarding, 15% are day. Most people stay here on the weekend. So in fact, those 15% of day students come to campus for the weekend for weekend activities rather than people leaving campus. This year, we have students coming from 25 countries and 29 states. So Brewster, we really celebrate cognitive diversity at Brewster. We believe that smart people learn in many different ways, and we believe that a community where we have a lot of people who think really differently from one another enhances the community. Who are all coming from very different walks of life too, really enhances the community that we have here. So our mission statement is to prepare diverse thinkers for lives of purpose. And our core values are respect, responsibility, independence, and then also interdependence. So that is pretty unique, I think, focusing on that piece of how we all connect together and the relationships that we form with one another. That is one of our core values and really important to us. So Brewster is a pretty unique place. If I were to explain, I mean, trimming down this presentation into a short amount of time is hard to do. So this is our nice image of our academic model. My overview, I'll go into some of the details of this on the next slide, but my overview is that the way that Brewster is designed is so that each student can thrive here. And we do that in many different ways, both inside the classroom, but outside of the classroom. So some of these ways that we do this are the unique structure and some opportunities that we have. So our structure, we have what is called a team-based approach at Brewster. So we have, again, 350 students divided up into about seven academic teams. An academic team is a group of about 50 students, and then the core academic teachers that teach those students. There are also arts faculty members and college counselors and other people on teams, but that core is going to be the core academic teachers for that student. what these teachers do is they come together 3 times a week to have meetings to talk about how students are doing. So our teachers, I mean, I've worked at a few different schools, at small boarding schools, and there's a lot of communication that happens. But I think what is different at Brewster is there's this very intentional space to have those conversations multiple times a week. And so with that communication between faculty, it makes a difference in the student's experience. Teachers get to know you really, really well. They get to know your kids really, really well so that they can challenge them appropriately, and also support them when needed. It's also like physically how we are structured in our academic center. Instead of being divided up by department areas, we're divided up by team areas. So a typical team area has a common space with couches for students to do some work or hang out during free periods, and then their classrooms off of that space. So even teachers working with your kid day in and day out at Brewster, they're passing each other in the hallways all the time. They actually share an office together. So the conversations that are happening between colleagues are much more about students than anything else. So it can be, I also say it can be one of those places where you're like, wait, how do you know this about me? And it's because we talk a lot. So I always like to be very transparent with students and families that this is how we operate. And then you walk into our classrooms and we're a little bit different too. So our average size class is about 12 students. And instead of having honors and regular level sections, we actually combine everybody into one classroom. It's called a differentiated curriculum because we have students learning at 2 different levels, standard or accelerated. Our academic dean does a 30-minute presentation on the nuances to this, so I do not have enough time to explain all of that. But my oversimplification is that everybody learns the same material, but the level at which you, or the individual work that you're going to do, homework, tests, quizzes, project assignments, whatever it may be, is going to be different based on what level you are in. So this is very personalized to you as a student and also can be flexible. If you're in accelerated math and then after the winter trimester, you're like, hey, this is becoming too much, you can move to standard and nothing about your schedule changes. From your teacher, your peers, anything, it all stays the same. And vice versa. You're in standard and you really want to push yourself to get to accelerated, you could make that shift. I think that these classrooms are really realistic to the real world, right? You have people in the real world, you have a problem and it's like, here is your problem. Here are the people you're working with, figure it out. And in our Brewster classrooms, it's here is the thing you need to find an answer to. Here are the people you're working with who are thinking really differently from one another, working at all different levels. Find an answer and we'll talk about it. So I think whether somebody is here for 1 year or 4 years, what they're getting out of our classroom is just practical to real world, whether it's in college or post-college. We also have a fantastic academic support program. So if that's something you're interested in, please reach out to us to learn more about that. We have a long list of unique opportunities at Brewster, including scholar programs, interim studies where students take a break from their regular classes and focus in on something they're really interested in. We have trimester classes in history, sciences, and the arts, so students can take advantage of more opportunities within those different departments. And then the afternoon program, we offer competitive sports, recreational sports, and arts, so you can really do a variety of things and things that really matter to you. We have a community action block, so clubs are actually meeting during our academic day in affinity groups, so even day students who it might be harder to stay for an evening meeting get to be a part of those activities. And then at Brewster, we also have a recognition system. So we believe privileges should be earned. The recognition system, what it is it asks teachers and dorm parents and coaches and program directors that are working with the students to really evaluate how the student is doing based on our core values of respect, responsibility, independence, and also interdependence. And then if they are demonstrating those qualities, they earn more privileges. So there's a lot of details that I could talk about within each one of those, but please reach out to us to learn more about those things. Because ultimately at Brewster, we want you to be you. It is culturally a really, I mean, I love this school. It's a really unique place in that it is a very supportive of each other's school. It is a school that cheers as much for the person who gets up on stage and gives a fantastic award-winning present or like performance as, they give that wonderful applause to that award-winning performance. And they also give equally wonderful of an applause to somebody who's more mediocre. And it's because what matters here is that you got up there and you did it. And that is what the community values. And so it is cool to try new things here. And what matters most is that you are doing it because it's of interest to you. So you can see our head of school quote, there are so many opportunities for you to be you at Brewster. And there's so many ways for you to really try new things and explore, because by doing that, you figure out what you like. And also those things that you may not want to do again, which is an equally important experience. Because we believe that when our students can really thrive here, then they'll be able to thrive anywhere. Having that, experience of feeling like I can do anything, whether it's 1 year or 4 years, you take that, you really, I think, embody that and take that with you wherever you go. So I love Brewster. I think it is a wonderful place. I see myself staying here for a long time. And I'm happy to talk with anybody more about any of these programs because there's a lot to say and not enough time to really dive into everything. And ultimately, too, thinking about the admissions process, this is a time for you to ask the questions that matter to you. So even if I dove into all of the details of everything, what's more valuable, I think, for families in the admissions process is to ask the questions that matter to them. And so reach out to us. Me personally, my contact information is here, or the admissions office to learn more about Brewster, whether you want to set up a campus visit here or just talk to me over the phone to learn more. I'm happy to chat with you.
And while this certainly is not a reason to pick a school, I would say to parents, if you have not been to New Hampshire in the Wolfboro area, you can do much, much worse, and places to visit for family and friends weekend. You will love it there. All right. So getting back to some of our questions. One question, and I think this is one that, families, especially when you're looking into boarding schools, think of a lot is, how many schools should we be applying to? How many eggs and baskets should we be populating to try to find the right fit for our child?
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, you Google it and there's so many schools, right? And each school seems, and each school is awesome in its own way, right? And so you have to start narrowing down the search, and that can be done in many different ways. And then ultimately, when you're deciding where do I want to apply, how many schools should you be applying to? It really depends on the person. I've had people that have only applied to one school. I often do not recommend that. I say most families that I work with apply to about 5 schools. Some families will apply to more schools than that too. I think if you are diving into the schools that you should be applying to are the schools that you can really see yourself at, and the school that you really see yourself growing at, and growing into that person, into who you want to be. So when you narrow down that list, because ultimately, say you apply to 15 schools and you get into all 15 schools, then it's going to be really hard to make the decision. So if you can narrow down that list to about 5 or 6 schools, I think that you are set up to have an informed decision to make, and also are applying to enough schools that hopefully you're going to get good news from at least a few of those schools. So that would be my advice. And if you are applying for financial aid is competitive at schools. There are limited budgets, and so I would recommend applying to adding maybe a couple of schools to your list just to increase the chances of getting some of that financial aid for your child.
Speaking of financial aid,
Yeah.
we have received a lot of questions about financial aid. I don't want to go too deep into these because we are on the clock per se for time, And we have a webinar for financial aid. I'll share the link in the chat coming up next month to really dive deep into it. But I don't want to ignore it either. So Alice, could you give us essentially the basics regarding, financial timeline, how folks apply, um, that sort of stuff?
Yeah. So, financial aid, I would recommend logging into the webinar that you all are going to do because that'll be really helpful in learning more. The basics, the real overview is again, research the schools that you want to apply to and see what the schools offer. So, financial aid, the deadline for applying for financial aid is typically the deadline when you submit your application. So, the same day you submit your application is the same day you want your financial aid application to be complete. There are a few different financial aid platforms that people use. Some very common ones are Clarity and also SSS. And so pay attention to what financial aid application needs to be completed. Give yourself enough time to reach out to the offices to ask questions if you have any questions about that. But the financial aid, thinking about that too, schools will give out financial aid on a need basis. So the demonstrated need of the family, but then some schools will also give out merit scholarships. So I would just research what is available at each school and contact the admissions office to learn more about how to apply for each one.
Excellent. And what about when they would find out for the
Oh
financial
yeah.
decisions?
Yeah. The
How does
second
that
half
work?
of it. So
Yeah, how
then
does that work in the timeline?
yeah. Assume all good things. You get into all the schools, you get financial aid at all the schools. In your acceptance on the parent contract is typically where you see the award. So, what financial aid you were given. If that feels like unrealistic for your family, reach out to the admissions office and talk about it. Each school, and I'm sure you will talk about this more in the financial aid webinar, but each school has its own methodology. I mean, there's a general methodology, but each school has its own way of looking at those applications too. So you might see different awards at different schools. Reach out to them and ask questions, is what I would say. If there's a school you really want to go to and that number doesn't seem realistic to you, call, get on the phone, talk to the financial aid director, and try to understand.
Excellent. Thank you. Lots of questions, about the process and, if one gets weighted more than the other, what should we focus on? And a lot of questions around grades and, the value of those in the application process. As an admissions committee looking at candidates, how do you weight things differently? How do you look at applications? What role do grades play and transcripts play in that?
Yeah. I mean, looking at applications, we are looking at every single piece of the application. So grades are one piece. The interview is a piece, the essays are a piece, parent statement, everything. So grades are important and they're not everything. I would also say each school is different, right? Like there might be some schools where grades weight really high in how they evaluate a candidate. There are other schools that have different programs. So even if you're not getting the grades you know you're capable of, if you enroll at that school and you're in maybe the academic support program, you're going to be able to see the grades that you know you're capable of, right? So grades are not the only piece, and there's more to the story usually behind the grades too. Um, and so if you are somebody who's on the fence thinking, my grades might not be good enough, still like research schools, ask admissions counselors about it, and apply because it's just one piece. Definitely work hard in your classes. That's what I will say. Work hard, meet with teachers for extra help if you need it, do the best you can do, um, and just know that it's one piece of many different pieces.
Excellent. So one of those big pieces of the many different pieces is the interview. I think this is one that probably for students in general, if there's an anxiety meter over the different steps, this is probably one of the higher ones. We got one great question, how do they prepare a shy or awkward teenager for the interview? how do parents talk to their kids about the interview? How can they help prepare them for it?
I think that's a great question. I mean, part of it is our job. Like as admissions counselors, it's our job to make somebody feel comfortable talking to us. So I put a lot of that on the admissions counselor. Like they should be able to talk to a student who is very chatty and willing to share, share, share. And they should be also be able to talk to somebody who's quieter and more reserved and might take longer to open up with information. As parents, what I would say to parents, if you are trying to prepare your student for an interview, is really try to reassure them that it's just a conversation. And I know that's like, it's that's one of those things that's like, oh, it's just a conversation, but the feeling of it does not feel like a conversation. So I get that piece. But the more you can try to have them feel comfortable that it's just a conversation and they're trying to get to know you, the better. Because I think the more comfortable they'll feel walking into our offices. I also think, though, in preparing somebody for an interview, the most important thing for the student to know is that they're going to have to talk about themselves. And for some people, that can be really uncomfortable. So they're going to have to talk about their interests, what classes they really like, and then also if they've like gotten an award, it's great to hear about that stuff. Like I can't tell you how many times I've talked to a student and then found out something so cool from their parents afterwards. And I'm like, man, I wish the student had told me that so we could have talked about it. So I think talking to your kid to say, hey, you're going to talk about these things, and it's not you bragging about yourself, it's that you really want to share this with the admissions counselor because this might be the opportunity they have to learn this about you. And so, yeah, I would try to prepare them by calming their nerves if you can. And then it's ultimately on the admissions counselor to really make your child feel comfortable in the interview process. And it's also the process, right? Like I interview somebody and I talk to them for a little while, but then hopefully I'll keep in touch with them throughout the process. And even if a family wants to jump on a Zoom later on, I mean, I can do that. Not all schools might not be able to do that, but at some schools people can continue that conversation. So if a student really feels like, oh, I didn't represent myself well, just know we could talk over the phone another time too, just because you might have a question and then we chat and I get to know that student a little bit more.
That is excellent. I'm glad you went into the, helping get them out of their shell, and it's okay to talk about yourself and, not feel like you're bragging. That's one question that came in on the Q&A specific to the essay. So I presume, the mentality is pretty much the same there, that this is your opportunity. It's also a good opportunity and a skill for kids to start, learning, as they will again have to apply for colleges and apply for jobs. So it's a good
Totally. And I hope, I'm sorry to cut you off. I also hope it's a moment where families can really reflect and be proud too. Like it feels nerve-wracking. I get that on the student side of I'm applying to schools, I don't know what's going to happen. But when you have finished that application and you have looked at everything, or you walk out of the admissions office from interviewing, you can feel proud of all of the things you've done. Like there are a lot of things that people have done that are pretty cool. And I get very excited talking to students about some of those things they've been involved in. And that doesn't have to be a big thing like, solving the common cold, right? Like it can be a small thing of just how somebody helped somebody in some particular way. But I hope in this process that families can also step back and really see like, wow, we've done so much and feel a sense of pride in it too.
Excellent. Are there any specific topics or questions or things that they should prepare to ask the school about?
I mean, if there's stuff that is really important to you, ask those questions. I mean, in my perspective, I have had so many different questions, and every question is a good question. So if there is something you were wondering about, ask it. And also realize, like I mentioned earlier, like if in that moment you couldn't think of the question, but you went home or on the drive home, you thought of something, then continue those conversations. Follow up with the admissions counselor and ask them. Or if it's before you even come to campus and you have questions, reach out to the admissions office. Because I don't, I guess my hesitation is I don't know the questions that are important to each family. So you have to figure that out for yourself. And that can be a range of things. And just every question is valuable.
Excellent. So there's a great point I'm following up because the ride home is probably when I would think of most of my questions. So thank you for the green light on that. What about for parents? So they get interviewed too. What's that involve for them?
Yeah. I mean, the parents, the time where I spend with the parents, like I mentioned earlier, it's a great time because I find it some really cool things about their kids. I see this as a time where it is for parents, it's really answering those questions that they have, but it's also trying to get a better sense of who their child is, right? Like, even if I have a great conversation with a student, I don't know that student as well as the parents or their guardian know them. And so I find that it is a time where I guess when parents are thinking about how do I prepare for this, be ready to talk about your kid and like the ways that you want to see them continue to grow and the ways that you think they might need more support or the things that they are doing awesome and you want them to continue to do awesome. I think it's also fine for parents in this process too to be reflective and think, what do I need from a school? For myself too. Like, what will the communication with parents look like if my kid is at a boarding school? What does that look like? And ask those questions if that's important to you. Because each school, the way that they communicate with families or families can get involved could be different. And so if you are somebody who wants to get involved in the school, you may want to know what that's like. So for parents, it's a similar thing. Like, be ready to ask your questions, get clarification around things, but also be ready to share some really wonderful things about your kids. Because parents have really nice things to say about their kids. And I would say, I'm smiling now thinking about like having been in interviews today and, days just thinking about those things that parents have said about their own children. It's awesome. So get ready to share those because we want to hear them.
I would imagine the range of questions you get from parents is probably a little bit different than the range of questions from students as well.
Yeah.
So we got a great question here from a parent in the Q&A. An international parent, basically you had mentioned, the students having to take ESL courses and things like that. But what about the parent if they're not English proficient, applying, to an English language school? And they've got to write the parent statement. What is it fair game for them to write it in their natural language and pass it through a translation tool? Like, what would you recommend for them?
Yeah, I would say I think that's fair game. I mean, I think if they also know somebody who is able to translate it and write it for them, that's fair game too. I think thinking about what that communication with the school will look like throughout your child's time at the school is important. So if you want somebody who speaks the language that you speak at the school, then you may want to ask, hey, is there a native faculty member, like a native speaker of this language faculty member at your campus that I could talk to? Usually schools that I've worked at will work with families in that way. I've also worked with some advisees of mine who like my advisee is the translator between me and the parents too. So anything goes, whatever is going to be helpful for that parent, we're going to try to make happen. But yeah, yeah.
So I think just to kind of recap, if they're coming for a tour or scheduling an interview, it's fair to ask if there's somebody on campus who can serve as a translator or for them to bring a translator if they.
Yeah, yeah, I would recommend for a tour to bring a translator or to have their child be the person that's going to translate.
Mhm.
But then, like, if you're thinking about, I guess I'm talking more about if that student is choosing whether or not to enroll at that school. You may want to think about from your, like, as a parent, how will I be able to communicate with this school? Is there a faculty member that speaks my same language? Or is it going to be through my kid that I'm speaking to the school? I just think about it yeah, from my perspective, it would probably be nice for me to know if there was a faculty member there that also spoke English. And so I would want them to, because that is my first language. So that is what would ease my own worries as a parent. So if that is concerning to you, I would just think about those things. But that would be at the end of the whole process in deciding where to go to school.
Excellent. Thank you. So we're in overtime here. So I won't take too much more of your time. We did have a lot of questions come in about standardized testing and the role that that plays in. And you mentioned to me before that Brewster is a test optional school, which means that students can submit test scores, they cannot submit test scores. And of course, we got the question along those lines of what would you recommend? Is it really test optional? Should they submit their scores? What's your thought process there?
Yeah, so definitely depends on the school. Look at if they require testing or not. My perspective with the test optional school, if you want to submit testing because it's testing you are proud of, go for it. Definitely add it to the application. In terms of how we are reviewing people's applications, we look at it and we can't put weight on it because we are not requiring it. So we will see it and we will look at it and we will be equally as excited if it's a test score that you all are proud of. And it just will, because it's test optional, not be weighted in our ultimate decisions. Again, look at the schools, see if they require testing, what the testing is, and then if it's test optional and you want to submit it, go for it, submit it.
Excellent. Another question. I know my standard answer to this, so I would like to kind of get your take on the standard answer is that when is the latest that we can take the SSAT? So what we typically recommend with this is that we have the last paper test, I believe, is January 4th, if I'm getting my dates correct off the top of my head. And if anybody doing the math on the 2 weeks it takes to get scores, that's going to get you just after January 15th for schools that have January 15th application deadlines. Typically, schools welcome you getting those test scores after that date, but what we recommend is reaching out and letting the schools know. We also have a paper test date on February 1st, and as you mentioned, a lot of schools have application deadlines on February 1st. So, whether a school that has a January 15th deadline is willing to wait until February 14th or 15th, they very well may be if they require testing, but it's important to kind of reach out and let them know when your child is testing and when they can expect the scores. Does that sound right to you?
Yes, yeah, I absolutely agree. I think communication between you and the schools is critical. So ask those questions. To me, everything you said makes sense in those timelines. In terms of taking the test and still being able to submit it, makes sense, but reach out to the school to make sure they know that you are signed up for that test, and that's when they can expect to get the test scores.
And I would, say we're seeing a lot more schools go back to test required, although Brewster is not at this time. And we did get a question on, how many times should we take the test, or should we send multiple scores to the school? I would say, on the amount of times taking the test, is to kind of look and be reasonable. I love your feedback on this too, is that we do see that on average students do better as they take the tests more. But the percentage that they do better really depends on how well they did the first time. So if you did really well, your child did really well the first time they took the test, their improvement's not going to be that great off of that. And so if they're just scoring, 10 points better, 20 points better, I presume, Alice, from your standpoint, that's not going to make a difference in how you see the child or view the child, as a candidate at your school. So it's probably not worth, retaking the test in that situation. On the other side of the spectrum, if you have a child who maybe is really nervous the first time they took it and that influenced their score, or maybe they took the test for the first time in the spring in the 7th grade, and they were a lot of things they just hadn't learned yet. And now they've learned them, into the fall of the eighth grade, and they can, improve greatly. Like those are more, to me, situations where it makes sense to retest. Does that, would that be your take on that as well?
Yeah, I think all of what you're saying, yes, I agree with. I also on the committee side of things, you can also ask the admissions counselors how they look at those scores because a lot of schools will super score the test for the applicant. So there's, three different sections and they'll take the best score from each section, giving you your, the best score you could get for the test. So ask about those things too, because if they did really well on two sections, like you're saying, Darren, but the other section, they're like, I think I could do better. Maybe it's worth taking it again to get that third section up a little bit, even if the other two sections go down, right? Because if that school super scores the test, they're going to take the best scores from each section and combine it together. But I think, yeah, and then I also go back to the like scheduling and what is an option for the family to do too. So if your only option is to take it one time and that's what you can do, that's what you should do. If you have the option to take it multiple times and you want to improve your scores, then do that too. Um, yeah, I agree. I agree with the points you made.
Awesome. I had one other thought on the test optional parts when you were answering that question before. I forgot to get it in before. And that is that if you do take the test and you decide not to submit it to the school, if you get enrolled at the school, it's probably worth asking that school post-enrollment if they would like to see your scores at that time. Because a lot of schools will look at these scores and use them for more than just part of the admissions evaluation. They will look at it and it'll help them understand for course placement, for advising, for, are there things that they need to get the kid caught up on for the classes they're going into, that sort of thing. So we look at standardized testing as admissions testing, and people see it as admissions testing, but it's actually used for a lot broader scope at the school and getting to understand the child and their needs and the services the school need to provide for them. So definitely worth, taking the test and then submitting after, even if you decide to withhold it. I see your head nodding your head a lot.
Yes, I know. I don't know if people can see me nodding, but it is true. Schools will use that to determine what classes make sense for that student.